In the previous video, we saw a situation in which doing the very best you can may interrupt the economy in a bad equilibrium. You are still doing the best you can, but overall, the economy is not. This was a situation in which there was no dominant strategy equilibrium, but all economic agents still played their best response strategies, which led to an equilibrium. We call this a Nash equilibrium. However, we may encounter a variety of situations in which players do employ their dominant strategies and still the economy gets stuck in a bad equilibrium. Those situations are really interesting precisely because individually rational choices not only may deliver a bad equilibrium, but also are certain to deliver a bad equilibrium for society. We modeled those interactions with the famous prisoner's dilemma game. So, what are those prisoner's dilemma games about? Let's see. So, Thelma and Louise are two famous criminals who unfortunately happen to get arrested once on a day. They're accused of a certain crime and are put in separate rooms to decide independently from each other, and that's the key, independently from each other, no cooperation, on their best course of action. Independent decision making here will be key because it will predetermine the equilibrium outcome in the end. Notice that both Thelma and Louise are individually rational. They decide completely independently from each other. There's no chance for cooperation between them, right? So importantly, they also need to decide at the same time, simultaneously, a situation which we refer to as simultaneous games. Now, each of the players has two possible courses of action: deny committing the crime or accuse the other criminal. If they both deny doing the crime, they get 1 year in prison each. If they both accuse the other, they both get 5 years in prison. So let's walk through Thelma's thinking process. And then we'll move to Louise. Thelma has two possible strategies, right? Deny and accuse. And the payoffs from each of those depends on what Louise does. So if Louise denies, Thelma can get 1 year in prison or 0 years in prison. It's clear that she will choose 0 years in prison. This corresponds to a strategy of accuse if Louise denies. If Louise accuses, Thelma will also accuse. This is because if she denies, she gets 10 years in prison, while if she accuses, she gets only 5. But then you see that Thelma has a dominant strategy, right? No matter what Louise does, Thelma is better off by accusing her accomplice of doing the crime. So that's exactly what she will do. She will accuse no matter what. Is this thinking process happening in the room where Louise is? It is very likely so, because you see the payoffs are symmetric along the payoff matrix diagonal. As a result, whatever Thelma thinks, Louise is going through the same thinking process. But let's double check so that we're sure of this. Now, if Thelma denies, Louise can deny or accuse, right? If Louise denies, she gets 1 year in prison, and if she accuses, she gets 0 years in prison. Right? So she will accuse if Thelma denies. Now, if Thelma accuses, Louise can get 10 or 5. She gets 10 if she denies and 5 if she accuses. It's obvious that no one in their right mind would rather stay in prison for 5 more years, right? So Louise will accuse if Thelma denies, but also accuse if Thelma accuses. Therefore, no matter what Thelma does, Luis has a dominant strategy, and it's to accuse. Our hunch was correct. So if payoffs are symmetric along the diagonal and one of the players has a dominant strategy, then the other player also has a dominant strategy. Both of them will choose to accuse, no matter what. That's the dominant strategy here. But notice, crucially, what happens if both of them accuse. They both get 5 years in prison. Can they do better than that? Yes, of course. Both of them can deny doing the crime, in which case they will only get 1. But as it's not individually rational for any of them to deny, they will not do it when they're not allowed to cooperate, right? So the entire economy here, consisting of these 2 criminals, will suffer 10 years in prison in total. If the criminals were allowed to cooperate, they would have suffered in total only 2 years in prison. The game above is great, exactly because it's not only a game. It illustrates a phenomenon we can encounter not only in prisons, but also in many, many other situations across the globe. Sometimes when players play their dominant strategies, society as a whole loses, and players lose as individuals in the end as well. Note also that in this class of games, players are not allowed to cooperate. If they were allowed to cooperate, they might have reached a more favorable outcome for themselves individually, as well as for the entire society. Knowing what a prisoner's dilemma game is, however, is not everything I want to tell you today. The equilibrium implications are also very interesting. So let's see. Remember the outcome from the invisible hand game. The players in that game were individually rational. They played their dominant strategy, and in the end, both individuals and the society achieved the best possible outcome. This is no longer the case here. It's no longer the case in the class of games we call prisoner's dilemma games. In those games, equilibrium outcomes are undesirable. And the interesting bit is that society is led into these undesirable outcomes precisely because individuals pursue their narrow-minded self-interests. So self-interest can be good for the economy, but it can be also bad for the economy, which brings me to my second point. Market coordination of economic agents can lead to the best outcomes for both individuals and society. But this coordination mechanism has clear limitations. Those limitations are overcome by a mechanism of cooperation rather than competition. So if the prisoner's dilemma players were allowed to cooperate in advance, they would have agreed to deny, right? As a result, they would have averted the extra years in prison. So cooperation between market participants sometimes can solve this problem. Another solution to the problem of undesirable societal outcomes is when people don't consider only their own payoffs when making a choice. Other people's payoffs also enter into their own utility function. We call this phenomenon altruism. We'll discuss altruistic behavior in the next video. Thanks for watching.